Welcome to our in-depth exploration of the top homeless areas in the United States. Now you might be thinking, top homeless areas? Is that like a top 10 water parks list, but profoundly depressing? And the answer is, kind of, yes. Except instead of exhilarating water slides, we have the harsh realities of homelessness in America. Over the next few chapters, we'll be taking you on a virtual tour of some of the most impacted places in the country. We're not talking about your casual, lost my keys and sleeping on a friend's couch kind of homelessness. We're talking about systemic issues that leave people with absolutely no other option but to live on the streets, in tents, or whatever makeshift shelter they can find. In this video, we'll delve deeply into the lives, environments, security, health, and reasons why people become homeless in these areas. We're going to look at the statistics, the stories, and most importantly, the systemic failures that contribute to this crisis. So buckle up, because we're about to take a long, hard look at a side of America that many would rather ignore. Get ready to be informed, because this is a conversation that desperately needs to be had. Before we dive into specific locations, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Because the issue of homelessness in America is like trying to understand the plot of a Christopher Nolan film. It's complex, multifaceted, and frankly, a little bit all over the place. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, on any given night in the United States, over 500,000 people are experiencing homelessness. That's more than the entire population of Wyoming, just wandering around without a place to call home. And these numbers only capture a snapshot in time. The reality is that millions of Americans experience homelessness throughout the year. Now you might be picturing a homogeneous group of individuals when you think about homelessness, but the truth is, the homeless population is incredibly diverse. We're talking about veterans who risked their lives for this country, families struggling to make ends meet, people battling mental illness and addiction, and individuals who've simply fallen through the cracks of society. And let's be clear, this isn't just a big city problem. While major metropolitan areas do tend to have larger concentrations of homeless individuals, rural homelessness is a very real and often overlooked issue. So, how did we get here? Well, blaming it all on individual choices would be like blaming the Titanic sinking on the iceberg having poor spatial awareness. It's simply not the whole story. The truth is, homelessness is a complex issue with a tangled web of contributing factors. One of the biggest drivers is the lack of affordable housing. In many cities across the U.S., wages haven't kept pace with the rising cost of living, especially when it comes to housing. This creates a situation where even people with jobs are one unexpected expense away from being priced out of their homes. Then there's the issue of mental health and addiction. The sad reality is that our current systems for addressing these issues are woefully inadequate. Many individuals struggling with these challenges end up on the streets, where their conditions often worsen without proper support. And let's not forget about systemic factors like racial inequality, domestic violence, and a lack of access to healthcare and job training. These factors disproportionately impact marginalized communities and contribute to the cycle of poverty and homelessness. Now let's talk about Skid Row. And no, I don't mean the fantastically terrible band from the 80s, though their music might actually make more sense after witnessing the reality of this place. Skid Row, located in downtown Los Angeles, is one of the most well-known homeless encampments in the United States. It's a sprawling area, roughly 50 city blocks, with a population density rivaling some small countries. But instead of bustling streets and high-rises, you'll find a sea of tents, makeshift shelters, and people struggling to survive. The environment is, to put it mildly, grim. Sanitation is a major issue, with trash piling up in the streets and limited access to toilets and showers. This creates a breeding ground for disease and makes it incredibly difficult for residents to maintain even basic hygiene. The air is thick with the smell of urine, feces, and despair. It's a stark reminder of the dehumanizing conditions that people are forced to endure when they have nowhere else to go. And it's a far cry from the glitz and glamour that Los Angeles is known for. Security is, unsurprisingly, a major concern in Skid Row. The area is plagued by crime, violence, and drug use. Now, before you jump to conclusions and say, "See, this is what happens when you have homeless people concentrated in one area," let's remember that correlation does not equal causation. These issues are symptoms of a much larger societal problem. When people are deprived of basic needs like housing, healthcare, and opportunity, it creates an environment where crime and desperation thrive. It's essentially Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but instead of self-actualization, you get a desperate struggle for survival. Health outcomes in Skid Row are predictably abysmal. Residents experience higher rates of chronic illnesses, mental health issues, and substance abuse disorders compared to the general population. Access to healthcare is limited, and many rely on overcrowded and understaffed clinics or emergency rooms for their medical needs. And let's not forget about the psychological toll that living in such conditions takes on individuals. The constant stress, fear, and lack of privacy can have devastating effects on mental health, further perpetuating the cycle of homelessness. Alright, let's hop down the California coast a bit, shall we? No, not to Napa, put the corkscrew away. We're going to San Francisco, a city known for its Golden Gate Bridge, sourdough bread, and, oh right, an absolutely brutal homeless crisis concentrated in the Tenderloin district. See, San Francisco is a city of extremes. You've got tech billionaires riding around on electric scooters with their artisanal kombucha, and then you've got folks struggling to survive on the streets just a few blocks away. The median home price here is something like $1 bajillion, while the poverty rate remains stubbornly high. It's almost like the city's stunning beauty and progressive ideals become a bit of a facade when you realize just how many people are being left behind. And nowhere is that more evident than in the Tenderloin, a dense neighborhood where poverty, addiction, and mental illness collide in a truly heartbreaking way. Now, the Tenderloin isn't all doom and gloom. There are community organizations working tirelessly to help those in need, and glimmers of hope do exist. But the challenges are immense, and it's a constant uphill battle against a system that seems woefully inadequate. Walking through the Tenderloin, you're immediately struck by the sheer number of people living on the streets. Tents line the sidewalks, and the air is thick with a mix of despair and, frankly, the smell of urine. It's not exactly the postcard image of San Francisco, is it? The Tenderloin has the unfortunate distinction of being one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in North America, and when you combine that with a lack of affordable housing, well, you can see how things have gotten to this point. Many residents here struggle with mental health issues or addiction, and the lack of adequate support services is painfully evident. And let's not forget about the opioid epidemic, which has hit the Tenderloin particularly hard. Fentanyl, that fun little chemical cocktail, has ravaged this community, leading to a spike in overdoses and further exacerbating an already dire situation. It's a brutal cycle, really, and one that's incredibly difficult to break free from. Look, the Tenderloin is a complex problem with no easy solutions, but one thing's for sure, simply ignoring it, or worse, criminalizing homelessness, isn't going to magically make it disappear. It's time for some serious systemic change, and frankly, it's long overdue. Now let's trade the Golden Gate for the Liberty Bell and head over to the East Coast, shall we? Specifically, we're going to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, or as it's become increasingly known, the epicenter of America's opioid crisis. And no place embodies this crisis more starkly than Kensington Avenue, a street that's become synonymous with open-air drug use and the devastating effects of addiction. Now, Philadelphia has always had its share of struggles, but the influx of fentanyl, that potent little devil, has turned an already bad situation into something truly catastrophic. Imagine a place where sidewalks are littered with needles, where the smell of smoke hangs heavy in the air, and where people are slumped over, caught in the throes of addiction, at all hours of the day. That's Kensington Avenue, a stark reminder that the opioid epidemic isn't some abstract concept, but a living, breathing nightmare for countless Americans. But it's important to remember that the people living on Kensington Avenue aren't just statistics, they're human beings. They're someone's children, someone's parents, someone's friends, and they deserve our compassion and our help, not our judgment. The situation in Kensington is incredibly complex, driven by a perfect storm of poverty, lack of opportunity, and easy access to cheap, potent drugs. See, when you're struggling to make ends meet, when you feel hopeless and forgotten, that allure of escape, even temporary, can be incredibly powerful. And let's not kid ourselves, the pharmaceutical industry, those benevolent purveyors of painkillers, bear a significant responsibility for this crisis. They flooded our communities with highly addictive opioids, making billions while turning a blind eye to the human cost. It's a classic tale of corporate greed, and we're seeing the devastating consequences play out on the streets of Kensington. Now there are people and organizations working tirelessly to help those trapped in this cycle of addiction. They're providing clean needles, offering treatment programs, and trying to connect people with the resources they desperately need. But they're often outmatched and outfunded, fighting a losing battle against a tide of despair, and that's the real tragedy here. It's not just the lives lost to overdoses, but the lives shattered by addiction, the families torn apart, and the potential wasted. Kensington Avenue is a stark reminder that we need to do better, to treat addiction as a public health issue, not a moral failing, and to offer compassion and support instead of judgment and indifference. Now let's hop on the Amtrak and head north to the city that never sleeps, shall we? New York City, a place of boundless energy, ambition, and, well, a whole lot of homeless folks. And while you'll find them scattered throughout the 5 boroughs, there's one neighborhood with a particularly long and complicated history with homelessness: the Bowery. Once upon a time, the Bowery was infamous for its Skid Row, a haven for down-on-their-luck men, struggling artists, and, if we're being honest, a fair bit of crime and debauchery. It was the gritty underbelly of New York, immortalized in songs and literature, a place where dreams went to die and cheap booze flowed freely. But times have changed, haven't they? These days, the Bowery is more likely to be associated with upscale boutiques, trendy restaurants, and million-dollar condos. You see, gentrification, that benevolent force of urban renewal, has swept through the neighborhood, pushing out the old and making way for the new and often wealthier residents. But amidst this shiny new facade, the ghosts of the Bowery's past still linger. While the notorious flophouses and saloons may be long gone, homelessness persists, albeit in a different form. Instead of men huddled on sidewalks, you're more likely to see individuals and families tucked away in shelters, their struggles hidden from plain view. Now, it's tempting to think that the gentrification of the Bowery has somehow eradicated homelessness from the neighborhood. But that's simply not the case. It's just pushed it out of sight, into shelters and onto the doorsteps of nearby businesses. And here's the thing about shelters. While they provide a roof over one's head, they're often overcrowded, lacking in privacy, and bound by strict rules and curfews. Imagine spending every night in a room full of strangers, never quite knowing where your next meal is coming from, or constantly worrying about being turned out onto the streets. That's the reality for many people experiencing homelessness in the Bowery. And let's not forget about the mental health crisis and the opioid epidemic, both of which continue to plague the Bowery, just as they do countless other communities across America. The lack of affordable housing, coupled with inadequate mental health services and the easy availability of fentanyl, creates a perfect storm that can trap people in a cycle of despair. The Bowery is a stark reminder that homelessness isn't just about a lack of housing, it's about a lack of opportunity, a lack of support, and a lack of understanding. And until we address these underlying issues, the cycle will continue, no matter how many trendy coffee shops or luxury condos we build. So far, we've seen how homelessness plays out in some of America's biggest cities, but let's be honest, nothing says America quite like Florida. And by America, I mean a place where sunshine and alligators coexist with a deeply troubling underbelly. Overtown Miami is a prime example. See, Overtown wasn't always synonymous with struggle. It used to be a thriving hub for black culture and business, a place where jazz legends played and black-owned hotels thrived. Now, it's a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change, especially when those fortunes were built on shaky ground in the first place. The reasons for Overtown's decline are complex. Decades of discriminatory policies, economic disinvestment, the usual greatest hits of systemic inequality. And as you might expect, the consequences are written all over the streets. The poverty rate in Overtown is staggering, and with it comes a tide of homelessness that's hard to ignore, even amidst Miami's carefully curated image of beaches and luxury. But here's the thing about Overtown. It's not just a place of despair. There's a resilience there, a sense of community that refuses to be extinguished. We'll explore that side too, because frankly, if anyone can teach us about surviving against the odds, it's the people who've been doing it for generations in Overtown. Now, if you're picturing Miami, you're probably thinking sunshine, beaches, maybe a retired dentist on rollerblades. What you're probably not picturing is the harsh reality of life on the streets of Overtown. The lack of affordable housing is a major driver of homelessness here, as it is in many places, but in a city obsessed with luxury condos, it feels especially cruel. Add to that the sweltering heat, the threat of hurricanes, and the general lack of resources, and you've got yourself a situation that's about as far from paradise as you can get. And while Miami might be known for its glitz and glamour, that wealth rarely trickles down to places like Overtown. Mental health and addiction are also significant issues in Overtown, often intertwined with the trauma of homelessness itself. It's a vicious cycle, really. You end up on the streets, which takes a toll on your mental health, which can lead to substance abuse as a coping mechanism, which then makes it even harder to get back on your feet. But amidst these struggles, there are glimmers of hope. Community organizations are working tirelessly to provide food, shelter, and support to those in need. And the spirit of Overtown, that enduring sense of community, continues to shine through. It's a reminder that even in the darkest corners of our cities, there's always a fight for something better. Las Vegas, the city of sin, where fortunes are won and lost on the spin of a roulette wheel, and where the cocktails flow as freely as the tears of the recently divorced. But beneath the dazzling lights and the carefully crafted facade of endless entertainment, there's another side to Vegas, one that's often swept under the rug like so many casino chips. Downtown Las Vegas, the city's older, less glamorous sibling, is where the reality of homelessness in Sin City becomes impossible to ignore. See, while tourists are busy living their best lives on the Strip just a few blocks away, thousands of people are struggling to survive on the streets. And the reasons, much like a losing streak at the blackjack table, can be traced back to a combination of bad luck and a system rigged against them. The lack of affordable housing is a major issue in Las Vegas, driven in part by the city's reliance on tourism and the low wages often associated with that industry. And let's not forget about the ever-present allure of gambling. For those already struggling financially, the temptation to gamble their way out of debt can be overwhelming, often leading to even greater financial ruin. It's a vicious cycle, really. People come to Vegas chasing a dream, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare. And as we'll see, the consequences of ignoring this crisis are about as subtle as a slot machine jackpot. Now I know what you're thinking. John, you're comparing the plight of homeless individuals to gambling? That's a bit on the nose, even for you. And you'd be right, it is on the nose. But the truth is, the same city that thrives on risk and chance often fails to provide a safety net for those who need it most. The streets of downtown Las Vegas are a testament to this harsh reality. The scorching desert heat, the lack of access to basic necessities like clean water and sanitation, and the constant threat of violence create a dangerous and unforgiving environment for those experiencing homelessness. And as if surviving on the streets wasn't hard enough, those experiencing homelessness in Las Vegas also face a unique set of challenges. The city's transient nature, with its constant influx of tourists and seasonal workers, can make it difficult for people to access services and build a support system. But amidst these challenges, there are organizations and individuals working tirelessly to make a difference. From providing meals and clothing to offering addiction recovery services and job training programs, these unsung heroes offer a glimmer of hope in a city that often seems to have forgotten about its most vulnerable residents. Ah, Seattle, the Emerald City, known for its stunning natural beauty, its thriving tech industry, and increasingly its tents. Yes, tents. Because even in a city that's home to companies like Amazon and Microsoft, a city that practically invented the concept of billionaire barista, homelessness has become an inescapable reality. And nowhere is this crisis more visible than in Pioneer Square, Seattle's oldest neighborhood. See, Pioneer Square has always been a place of contradictions. It's where Seattle's history is literally etched into the streets, with underground tours taking you back to the city's gritty pre-Starbucks days. But above ground, it's a stark reminder of how even in one of America's most prosperous cities, the gap between the haves and the have-nots can feel like a chasm. The reasons for Seattle's homelessness crisis are complex, but let's be honest, they're not exactly a mystery. Soaring housing costs, fueled in part by the tech boom, have made it nearly impossible for low-income residents to afford even the most basic apartments. And as more and more people are priced out of the housing market, the streets of Pioneer Square have become a refuge of last resort. Now I know what you're thinking. John, Seattle is known for its rainy weather. Surely living in a tent there must be miserable. And you'd be right, it is. But as we'll see, for those experiencing homelessness in Seattle, the rain is often the least of their worries. Now you might be wondering, how does a city like Seattle, with its progressive reputation and its abundance of wealth, end up with such a visible homelessness crisis? Well, it turns out that even with the best of intentions, good intentions don't pay the rent. And in Seattle, the rent is astronomical. The tech boom, while great for the city's economy in many ways, has also led to skyrocketing housing costs. And as more and more tech workers move in, those at the lower end of the income spectrum are being priced out at an alarming rate. It's a classic case of a rising tide lifts all boats, except for the ones that are already underwater. But the problem goes beyond just housing costs. The opioid epidemic, another crisis gripping the nation, has hit Seattle particularly hard, further exacerbating the challenges faced by those experiencing homelessness. Addiction and mental health issues, often intertwined with the trauma of living on the streets, create significant barriers to finding stable housing and employment. And while Seattle has made efforts to address homelessness, with initiatives like increased funding for affordable housing and expanded outreach programs, the problem persists. It's a stark reminder that even in a city known for its innovation, finding solutions to complex social issues takes more than just good intentions and a few extra lines of code. Alright, let's mosey on down to Austin, Texas, the live music capital of the world. Known for its vibrant music scene, delicious breakfast tacos, and well, a growing homeless population. See, Austin, much like that one friend who insists on wearing a fedora despite all evidence to the contrary, likes to see itself as a bit of a quirky oasis. And while that's all well and good for those who can afford the ever-increasing rent, It makes things particularly tough for those struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Downtown Austin, in particular, has become a focal point of the city's homelessness crisis. You see those tents? Those aren't for some ironic music festival. Those are people's homes. And the reason they're stuck there is a familiar tune: rising housing costs, stagnant wages, and a lack of affordable housing options. Austin's Keep It Weird slogan seems to have extended to its housing policies because finding a place to live that doesn't require remortgaging your kidneys is about as likely as finding a sober cowboy at a bachelorette party. The city's rapid growth, fueled by tech companies like those fleeing California, looking at you Tesla, has only exacerbated the problem. It's like inviting a bunch of friends over for a barbecue, but forgetting to buy enough burgers and then watching as they eat all your patio furniture out of desperation. Now, Austin isn't completely oblivious to the issue. They've got programs, they've got initiatives, they've even got a plan to end homelessness, eventually. But the problem is, much like that one friend who promises to call you back but never does, their efforts often fall short. The city's homeless population has been steadily increasing, and the resources available simply can't keep up. It's like trying to put out a raging dumpster fire with a squirt gun filled with good intentions. You might get a little bit of steam, but you're mostly just making yourself feel better while the problem continues to burn. And the reasons for homelessness in Austin are as varied as the city's food trucks. You've got folks who've lost their jobs, folks struggling with mental health issues, folks fleeing domestic violence, and folks who just can't keep up with the skyrocketing cost of living. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but one thing's for sure: simply wishing the problem away isn't going to magically make it disappear. It's time for Austin to stop just singing the blues about homelessness and start taking some concrete steps to address it. Because while the music may be lively, the reality for many on the streets of Austin is anything but. Well folks, we've arrived in Portland, Oregon, a city known for its craft breweries, indie bookstores, and a certain laissez-faire attitude towards, well, a lot of things. But beneath the veneer of artisanal coffee shops and meticulously groomed beards lies a harsh reality. Portland, like many American cities, is grappling with a homelessness crisis of epic proportions. Downtown Portland, once a bustling hub of commerce and culture, has become an all-too-visible epicenter of this crisis. It's like walking through a particularly depressing episode of Portlandia, only without the ironic detachment and quirky humor. Just real people facing real struggles, often with little support. Now, Portland has a long and complicated history with homelessness. Some blame the city's famously generous social services, which, like a free buffet at a casino, may attract people from other areas. Others point to the state's lack of affordable housing, which is like trying to find a parking spot in downtown Manhattan during rush hour. Good luck with that. Whatever the cause, the result is clear. Portland's streets have become de facto shelters for a growing number of people. And while the city has made efforts to address the issue, it's a bit like trying to empty a bathtub with a teaspoon while the faucet is still running. The human cost of this crisis is staggering. Walk through downtown Portland and you'll see it etched on the faces of those living on the streets. The desperation, the hopelessness, the sheer exhaustion of trying to survive another day without a safe place to call home. It's enough to make you want to drown your sorrows in a locally brewed IPA, but even that small comfort is out of reach for many. And the problems extend beyond just a lack of housing. Mental health issues, addiction, and a lack of access to basic services are all too common among Portland's homeless population. It's a perfect storm of societal failures, all converging on the city sidewalks. Now, Portland isn't completely ignoring the problem. They've got programs, they've got initiatives, they've even got a mayor who seems to genuinely care, although these days that's a pretty low bar to clear. But the scale of the crisis is simply overwhelming. It's like trying to fight a forest fire with a garden hose. You might be able to put out a few flames, but the inferno rages on. Portland needs to get serious about addressing its homelessness crisis. And by serious, we mean actually funding affordable housing, expanding mental health services, and treating people with the dignity and respect they deserve. Because right now, the City of Roses is looking a lot like a city of broken promises. Well, folks, that's our whirlwind tour of America's homeless crisis. We've seen the despair on Skid Row, the desperation in the Tenderloin, and the crushing weight of poverty in cities big and small. It's a sobering reminder that even in the land of opportunity, far too many people are struggling just to survive. But this isn't a problem we can simply ignore. It's not enough to just feel bad for a few minutes and then go back to our comfortable lives. We need to demand better from our elected officials, we need to support organizations working to make a difference, and we need to challenge our own preconceived notions about homelessness. Because behind every statistic, every tent, every cardboard sign, there's a human being with a story to tell. A story of hardship, of resilience, and often, of systemic failures that have left them without a place to call home. It's time to stop seeing homelessness as someone else's problem and start seeing it as what it is. A national crisis that demands our attention, our compassion, and our action. Thank you for joining us on this important journey through the top homeless areas in the U.S. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth content. Let's work together to raise awareness and find solutions to this pressing issue.